Hello and welcome to the Wittering Podcast, episode 15, where we are joined on Remembrance Day 2024 by soldier, doctor and innovator Alex Nicholls, who provides a practical re-education about dietary health.
Your bread, potato, pasta, rice, all of that is essentially just long chains of sugar that as soon as you put it in your mouth and start to chew, the saliva and the amylase, an enzyme in your saliva, chops it all up and you may as well be eating Haribo by the time it gets down to your stomach.
How to create life-extending behaviour in his patients.
You have wealth management, but what you're doing with your health. You saw the light bulb come on for them, that actually they put so much time and effort into looking after certain aspects of their life, and yet they are 6 stone overweight, they don't train. And it was literally like, actually, I'm going to change my priorities here.
Evidence that an improved diet results in improved outcomes.
We took it from a sort of mediocre diabetes practice to like we were then the lowest prescribing practice in the area for medications.
Why not all science is good science.
All of this was paid for science by big food companies that had an agenda and wanted to articulate something. But unfortunately, we've then based the majority of our dietary advice on those legacy recommendations.
And why governments are also to blame for poor health.
We do a lot of blaming of individuals who have got themselves into poor physical state, when actually they're in a complete obesogenic environment. Like everything they're surrounded by is designed to make them as fat as possible and as unhealthy as possible.
With a bit of witter by Andy about national security.
If you're serious about your national security, you want the well-being, both physical and mental well-being, and therefore longevity, resilience, productivity, blah, blah, blah. You should be putting that above profit and taxes and which of the sugar federations are your mates in the Isles of Whitehall.
And some chat about a shared secret predilection between Alex and his wife.
She was like, no, I'm absolutely down with all of this and I will fully support you in whatever it is you think we need to do. Which I was like, this is free reign for me to go. Like, I'm building a bunker.
And now, on with the show.
Hello and welcome to the Wittering Podcast, episode 15. I'm very excited and honoured to be joined by my old chestnut, Dr. Alex Nicholls, who is a army soldier and doctor. He's also a business partner, which we won't talk about now, but we'll talk about another time. But he is also the owner of one of the most genuinely, naturally innovative brains I've ever come across. And I've been working in innovation for about 25 years. So I'm absolutely delighted thank you for coming on. Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself? As much or as little?
Yeah, so, first of all, thanks for having me on. So I, as you mentioned, I'm an army doctor. So technically I'm a GP by trade, but my population is slightly different, with my day job being the fact that they're all between sort of 18 and 50, and usually pretty fit. So certainly there are standards that they have to meet. My day job is as a regimental medical officer. But over the last few years, I have had a slightly convoluted career, in that I try and get involved with innovation where I can. I get quite frustrated by some of the processes and try and do as much as I can to get after some of the solutions, which in the military can be somewhat more difficult, it being a hierarchical organisation. But actually, I've been very lucky with some of the opportunities that I had. I was seconded down to a strategic innovation hub that worked, working for Strategic Command, actually through COVID, and that was a fantastic opportunity to get after some real game-changing technology and innovation at a time when it was really needed. So I did that for about 2 years. They were very kind in putting me through a strategic innovation course at Oxford University as well. And then since then, I've been applying that wherever I can. So getting after some interesting problems. I'm interested in human performance. I work a little bit in rugby league. and then with sports teams and soldiers, trying to get after making them fitter, healthier, stronger, wherever I can.
Okay, excellent. That's very cool. And so so I'm going to now witter about as anecdotal experience I had. Okay, and you have to bear with me because it's then going to become hopefully relevant. So when I okay, about 5 years ago, I had such an indulgent Christmas with alcohol and food that at the end of the month, end of December, I was like, right, I'm doing a month dry. Okay, no alcohol. And at the same time, a friend of mine at work called Tim, long live Tim, and he will because he looks after himself incredibly well. He's very well informed. But he gave me this book here, Either Come In, Eat Rich, Live Long. Now I know you might have some reservations about that, Alex, which we'll come to. But to me, it was quite revolutionary. So I wanted to give up alcohol for a month, which would be the longest without any form of mind-altering substance. Anything longer than 2 weeks since I was 16. So it was. I wouldn't say that I'm an alcoholic, but I'm very, very keen on it. So, but I had got to the point where it was going to be actually quite easy. I recognised it was going to be quite easy to give it up. So I gave it up for a month, and I also decided to read this book, and it was yet another diet, and I was like, oh, brilliant. But the first chapter was a lot about the history of the design of our diet, modern diets today, that came from America and then and into the UK, so which we'll talk about in more detail. And I was like, okay, that's quite interesting. There's a bit of a conspiracy there. I love a bit of a conspiracy. And then I was like, well, okay, well, I'm up for giving this a go. And then I flipped to the recipe section where it was all about basically you get a bit of meat, a port loin, and you put some cheese on it, and then you put some bacon on top of that, and then you put some more different cheese on top of that. You can or cannot eat vegetables. It's up to you. You just can't eat bread and potatoes and pasta and that sort of stuff. I was like, oh, I can do that. I can have a packet of bacon, which we'll discuss again, packet of bacon and avocado for lunch. And so I then proceeded to do what was initially a month with no alcohol. It then became 3 months without alcohol and eating pretty healthily. And the reason why it sustained so long is because it became quite easy. And then I remember clearly 2.5 months in, I was walking down our lane, by the lake and everything. I've done a lot of mushrooms and acid in my time, and you have these sort of like epiphany experiences. I had one of those completely clean, walking down this road, and the whole world came alive, and it was just a different level. It was like the curtains had been drawn back, and I've been reading, and it's possibly a lot of it is my sort of going off the tracks when I was about 16 comes down to certain authors, and one of them was Aldous Huxley and Doors of Perception. The idea being that you have to have these filters. It was like the filters had been removed. I got this massive hit. I was so excited. I came back, and then in the space of like 2 weeks, I started 2 businesses for the first time, which I'd been wanting to do for ages. I started making jerky, which I had all the equipment for ages. So it was just a hugely positive, both physical. I'd lost a lot of weight. I was pretty trim, but more importantly to me, it was the mental, the creativity, and the energy, and it was absolutely mind blowing. And then anyone who would talk to me for longer than a minute got to hear about it, and so it was a really powerful experience. I then kind of fell back into a little bit of carbohydrate, processed food, and alcohol. And for like the next sort of 6 years or so, I've had periods of time when I've gone into a sort of keto diet, as it's talked about, or paleolithic, which we can talk about, a kind of mixture of the two. But anyway, but I need to do that without alcohol to get that high again, that natural high. I need to do both. So at the beginning of September, I decided that I'd do 2 months of keto and no alcohol. And then you and I were away at the emergency services show, and you kindly brought me some salami to support my keto diet. And then you said, "What are you actually eating?" And then I had a bag of almonds, and he looked at me and goes, "No, that's going to put you out of keto." I was like, "No, it's not." And then I looked into it, and I've since looked into it a lot more. And the general notion is that people who think they may be in keto, it's probably like 95% of them aren't, because it's actually a real, and unless you're monitoring, and I don't know how you even do that with bloods or whatnot, it's kind of, the whole thing's probably a bit flawed in terms of burning, of creating ketogens or whatever, and burning them up. Yeah. So that's the sort of background. It's relevant to the layperson because at my age of 40, between 40 and 48 now, it's made a huge difference to my well-being, to my life. I've started these businesses where I used to be an employee. now I'm a freelance. I do what I like within reason, and I have my own companies and work for other cool companies. It's a life changer. I'm less of a dickhead around the house most of the time. So Alice, my wife, is very happy about it. So I kind of wanted to explore that in a way that I don't think enough people know about it. I don't think it's just another fad diet. I think there's aspects of it that can be really useful, and that's what I wanted to talk to you about, if that's all right, Alex.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, there's loads of different
Yeah.
bits we can get into there. I mean, in terms of Ivor Cummins, where you started, so I first came across Ivor. I believe is he a chemical engineer by background?
I think I don't know. He's go on, carry on. I'll dig it out. I've got his book.
He's an engineer of some description by background, and I know that he essentially had a similar epiphany where he was doing some digging into his own cardiovascular health, and I think like a lot of these journeys, sort of he started questioning some of the convention of how we eat, the healthy plate that is a third carbohydrates, etc. So I first came across him when I think I was a GP trainee. And through my GP training time, I had quite. So I was working in a civilian GP practice as part of my training, and I had a lot of type 2 diabetic patients that I was seeing. I was helping them. I was managing them in a pretty conventional way. I had a really good supervisor at the time that I was able to discuss some of these patients with, and I came across another
Alex,
GP.
sorry, it's 11 o'clock, mate.
Okay, shall we stop for a minute?
Yeah.
A moment of silence for our fallen soldiers.
Okay. So can I go back?
That could potentially be a first on a podcast. I'm not sure anybody will have done an 11 o'clock.
I didn't know if it was a minute. It might have been. I suspect it might have been about 58 seconds.
Yeah.
But the intention is there to thank everyone who's
yeah. By the time you'd stop me talking and reminded me, then the poignant moment is there.
Yeah, indeed. Can I go back? Didn't you say you were treating the type 2 diabetes patients in the typical way? Can you just quickly tell us what that is?
Yeah. So I mean, initially there is a focus on lifestyle advice, eating less, do more, which to a certain extent, people do know, and there are many barriers and reasons why they haven't achieved it at that point. And I think first of all, it's worth sort of reiterating that so type 2 diabetes, where it isn't because your body isn't producing insulin. That's type 1 diabetes, but it's the fact that your body has stopped responding. So there's something called metabolic syndrome, which is a collection of conditions that type 2 diabetes is one of them, that is due to predominantly lifestyle factors. Being overweight, is that your body has stopped responding to a hormone that your body produces to control its blood sugars. So your blood sugars start getting higher. That is entirely reversible, and historically we haven't treated it as such. It was very much treated as a one-way condition, that if you got diabetes, then you could. I think people thought that you could maybe slow it down, but it wasn't aggressively treated as a reversible condition. It was okay. Well, try and lose a bit of weight, but here's some medications, and we'd very quickly end up, initially with a drug called metformin that is a tablet that hopefully controls your blood sugars a little bit. But quite often these patients used to progress, and a lot of them unfortunately still do, onto needing to take more complex, more expensive, and sometimes injectable medications to control their blood sugars to get it down. So the conventional way was, you might signpost them to some resources about lifestyle management. Some areas, and over the last 10 years or so, there have been lifestyle courses that people can go on, looking at weight loss. But again, that's very much the sort of conventional eat less, do more sort of weight loss advice, and the sustainability of that is the evidence is mixed. So some more radical solutions to it recently have been about giving people shakes and sort of dietary shakes to try and manage their diabetes, and there's now NHS funded programs where people are given shakes to try and manage their diabetes. But it's very much about the conventional healthy plate and doing a bit more exercise. And sort of when I was reflecting on how we do that, I started doing a bit of digging. I came across another GP in Stockport called David Unwin, who actually reached out to me on Twitter. So I started just asking a few questions on Twitter, sort of putting out some of my perceptions out there. And with the support of my supervisor at the time, I actually started experimenting with a couple of my patients. They brought something to me, and we had a conversation about the lifestyle advice. I had done quite a bit of it myself. So in terms of your keto journey, I, from a sports science perspective, had experimented with it myself. I've at that time I had run a fasted marathon. Somebody had a bet that I'd bonk and that I wouldn't be able to do it. And he was
bonking for those.
So that where you run out of sugar, and so you get 2 or 3 hours into a marathon, you've run out of your stored glycogen, the amount of energy stores that you've got, and basically you just can't keep going. It happens to cyclists a lot. And so the person that had the bet with me was a sports scientist. He had his masters from Loughborough in sports science, but was very much of a conventional approach to nutrition. So sports science nutrition. I'd done a little bit of digging. So Prof Noakes, so Tim Noakes, he was one of the absolute sports science nutrition gods. He wrote The Law of Running years and years ago about sort of sports science nutrition. And then quite famously, 10 years or so ago, tore a chapter out of his book when he got diabetes and basically said I'm all wrong and that this isn't how we should be doing it. The Law of Running, and then he's got another follow-on book called The Law of Nutrition, which is sort of epiphany of coming to how it. So I've done a bit of digging, and I was pretty confident that I could do a marathon fasted. I just needed the right amount of build up and adaptation to switch my fueling systems over, because everybody, when you eat lots of carbohydrates, fuels on sugar. So be it your bread, potato, pasta, rice. All of that is essentially just long chains of sugar that, as soon as you put it in your mouth and start to chew, the saliva and the amylase, an enzyme in your saliva, chops it all up, and you may as well be eating Haribo by the time it gets down to your stomach. So everybody fuels on sugar in that way. And when you regularly consume large quantities of starchy sugar, your body loses its ability to rapidly mobilize fat. And to break down your stored fat for an energy supply. It's one of the reasons that fasting can help. And so essentially, I was pretty confident with a period of adaptation, which I did for sort of 6 or 8 weeks, that I'd be absolutely fine. So I gradually reduced my carbohydrate intake as I was training for said marathon, and I was fine. I did, just over 3 hour, just over 3 hour marathon. So it's a few years ago now.
Very good.
I'm not sure I could still do that without said training. But yeah, I didn't fall over.
Sorry, Alex. Did you feel? I don't know if you had a reference experience to put that fasted marathon against, as in it was different in this way. I felt challenges in that way, or it was easier or better or harder.
Yeah, so I'd piled in lots of times on long distance stuff. I am not the most natural endurance athlete. but I enjoy it. And so yeah, quite a few long runs on my own. I've got my nutrition wrong and piled in. The said same person that I was having a bet with is a pretty good cyclist, and we did the Tour de Yorkshire Sportif, and I royally piled in on that, and didn't finish. So yeah, in terms of the my previous experience of bonking and not getting my nutrition right, I had got it wrong on a number. So and actually during the race, I felt really on my faster mouth. I felt really good. I felt stronger than I'd done previously, and it was just about I didn't have the sort of top end. I couldn't push myself quite as hard, but that sort of
okay.
I think of it a bit more like a diesel engine. It's just sort of like grumbling along in the background.
Yeah.
And for some really long endurance stuff, it worked really well. Anyway, so that was my experience with the nutrition side of it. So all this kicked off really with one of my patients came to me in a similar way to you and said, like, I realised I need to lose some weight. What do you think to me having a go at this for a period of time? And I think in a relatively cautious GP trainee type of way, I sort of heard his ideas, concerns, and expectations, and what he was thinking about it. And he was really keen. I said, I'm happy to sort of have conversations about it and support you. At that time, I don't think I made any recommendations. I was like, let's see how it goes. You're probably not going to do yourself that much harm for a short period of time. And if it is something that's going to improve your risk factors, overall, the net might be good. So we went away, and he the weight absolutely fell off him. I think he lost like 30 kilos. And
really?
I did his bloods quite regularly. Everything got better. Like, so his high blood pressure, his diabetes, everything went away. He had a new lease of life. He was like just very, very grateful for me not shutting it down, which I think sort of, it got my attention. I then, with David Unwin, who a really senior GP, so he sits on the is it all party parliamentary group on diabetes, and he's been really trying to push some of the. So he's called Low Carb GP on Twitter. So his loyalties to a nutritional technique are pretty upfront. That he for reversing diabetes, he has really pushed a lot of the boundaries on how we approach and manage diabetes. And I actually went and spent a day in clinic with him. So he was really kind. He invited me over as a young whippersnapper learning the trade. I went and spent a day in practice with him, and it was great. Sort of, he gave me the confidence to manage and to manage my patients, but also manage more senior clinicians who were dubious about my approach. But I think by the time I'd then finished GP training, I had a case series of 30 or 40 patients that I'd reversed diabetes in. I then put it. So I published a sort of guide. Me and another colleague so I recruited one of my other colleagues who had sort of seen the effect I was having, and then had got on board. And between us at this GP practice, we completely changed the stats. We took it from a sort of mediocre diabetes practice to like we were then the lowest prescribing practice in the area for medications. We had the lowest numbers of because everybody that came in with a new diagnosis of type 2, the partners were very happy with me having a slightly longer consultation with them, a more regular consultation. I did essentially it's coaching to then get them on board.
Okay.
It was quite personality driven with the patients. I think you could tell relatively early on who was going to really sort of get on board with it and be successful. And once they got that sort of hope, because a lot of these patients had probably battled with their weight all their life and didn't necessarily have the hope and the belief that they could make a big deal. They've been overweight since they were young. They'd watched their health gradually decline by just following the conventional advice and failing, and actually this doing something slightly different. They got the bug a lot of the time and completely changed. And I had multiple patients and some real surprises as well. Like one, so he had kidney problems and went away. which at the time I was really I wasn't expecting that, and it went away.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's where I first came across the one you started, the engineer.
This thing.
Ivor Cummins. That's where I first came across. So Ivor Cummins.
Okay.
So there's a group called Public Health Collaboration that was essentially started. David Unwin was part of it. It was a group of clinicians, doctors. There's a few PTIs now. They run an annual conference, and I think Ivor Cummins then did a presentation at the annual conference. That's where I first came across. But he's really pushed the boundaries of how we're doing things.
I think So I think he's a chemical engineer, which is you've got to be smart to do that. But so I think a really important point you made, Alex, about the fact that you can put like the logic and the evidence in front of someone and go, if you do this, which will be challenging, this will be the benefits to you. You'll live longer and healthier and happier. But it's still really hard to do. I find sometimes, but this book's really, I'm not pushing this book, but it was what kind of changed after looking at the recipes. I was like, I can do that. I then sort of, in each of the chapters, it's got sort of examples of people changing their lives. Like this lady came in with like bone problems or kidney problems, and it just seems, and it kind of ties into that notional understanding I had about fasting, how it's a return to sort of our original basis of existence, times of plenty and times of sparsity, and then your body looks after itself in the fasting periods in order to increase your chances of survival. So it kind of self-repairs. It just sounds absolutely amazing. And then sorry, we'll get back to the science, but so I've had 2 months kind of doing keto with a bit of paleo, so avoiding processed food, not eating lots of fat but not too much, and it's just fascinating going down aisles of Lidl, for example, or Morrison's. I was in the petrol station the other day. There's literally nothing I can buy in the entire shop, or this one aisle. There's nothing that isn't processed. So it's a real sort of eye opener to the absolutely immense, sad state of affairs we're in as the Western world in terms of quality of food, which we'll come to. But then, because sometimes I'm like, I know, because I've experienced it. I know that keto and alcohol freeness is great for me. It's just so life is short, death is coming, not in a negative way, in an inevitable way, which means let's get on with it, And so if I want to get on with it effectively and enjoyable, I need to live a proper life in respect of what I put into my body. But still, sometimes it's really hard to. Oh, it's all right. I'm just gonna have a packet of Skips. Actually, I might as well have 4 packets of Skips, and then 5 months later, I'll just do 2 pizzas a night. It's madness and out of control. So I've been just recent, and I kind of forget. I have drunk Andy and sober Andy. Sober Andy should leave a message for drunk Andy, going, I know you think that drinking's okay, but it's not. It's the same for I know you think that eating loads of cereal is okay, but it's not. And to try and listen to myself. So I had these 2 months off. And it finished sort of at the end of October. And then actually this weekend, I had 3 pizzas. I drank 4 beers on Friday and Saturday night, and 1 beer last night. And after the Friday night, Saturday morning, I felt deplorable. I was horrible. I started getting a sniffle as well, which I don't normally get. I haven't had recently, and I've been parading around the garden in like a t-shirt. Not having a trouble, and so it's just that, and I'll forget that though in about a week. I'll forget the difference, but at the moment it's absolutely clear that to eat and imbibe properly is absolutely critical. And sort of narrative around it, you can tell this to myself. That's what I'm saying. Saying it to myself still doesn't always register. So is it? I'm really interested because I think it's about the human experience, about the narrative around it. When you were those patients, you were saying. You see at what point do you think you could say, oh, they're not going to make it? Their intentions are good, but they're not going to make it. Is there any correlation or causation?
So I think a lot of it was how much they wanted it to start with. So it is tough to completely change your life. Be that it's a behavior change thing, and actually making any sustainable behavior change, and that's what it needs. There's no point in doing something for a few weeks at a time. It has to be a lifestyle. It has to be sustainable. You have to completely be able to change big bits of your life, and it's the same with other addictions, other pathological behaviours, there's no point in just fixing it for a few weeks, because you'll end up slipping back in and going back. So it has to be something that you can either live with your current life, or you can change your aspects of your life that don't work to make it so you're able to do it all the time. But I think the ones I could really tell were those that were really scared, that had a bit of a health shock, and that was then the lever for them to be like, right, I am not going down this path. And I think so some of the language that I use with them is, I tended to find those that were quite wealthy were, and it's nothing to do with their wealth, but that those that were quite wealthy actually did quite well. And it's like, because I use the language of that, you have an accountant, you have wealth management, but what you're doing with your health, and actually they'd be like, and it was almost like you saw the light bulb come on for them, that actually they put so much time and effort into the like looking after certain aspects of their life, and yet they are 6 stone overweight, they don't train, and it was literally like, actually I'm going to change my priorities here and shift actually to, I want longevity and I want to be here. There were wealthy sounds a bit awful, but that was one of the sort of, it was a leverage point, something that I could get my claws into, that actually I could highlight the mismatch in their priorities, that you're putting loads of time into your wealth management, but you're in shit state from a health perspective, and that was something that I could use to sort of leverage them. Other people that did well, again, I suppose it's that if I could find something to get my claws into, those that had a really young grandkids and that were really close to their grandkids and wanted to be playing football with their grandkids, something like that I could use as a leverage point and highlight, and sort of just in it. A lot of them came to the realization themselves, but that was sort of the biggest predictor of it, is those that were motivated. It's probably motivation, isn't it? Is the thing that I'm saying, that thing that they can use as leverage.
Yeah, but man, that's really interesting, because I've noticed in my small pool of those people who I know one way or another, or watch, is that some people I know who've become wealthy, like serious monies, their fitness approach to fitness has changed drastically. And it's almost to the point where I've always put it down to an extent that they've got more to live for. And combined with they've got more free time and all this sort of stuff. So I find that particularly interesting.
I suppose
it's almost like
it depends how you define wealth, doesn't it? Sure. Like there's a lot of, I've said a few the happiest people I know live in the smallest houses, like, and it's that like that contentment, and it's how you define wealth. Like, actually there's some really happy people out there that are just content and don't need that much. So yeah, I don't know. It's a difficult thing to define, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I just thought, I remember I saw a before and after Jeff Bezos picture, because he's absolutely ripped now. Walking around like a Adonis, and
I suppose some of its capacity. You've got the choice there to be able to pick and choose, haven't you? Like when I've used the comment about architects before. It's amazing what you can do with unlimited resource. That, like, actually, if you've got no constraints, then you can do some pretty incredible things. And actually, those that don't necessarily have the resource, be that wealth, time, support, family, whatever the resource is, there are other constraints on their ability to deliver. Be that health, be that fame, whatever building.
Well, so that kind of I often think from that thought, well, is what health and well-being, is it like a two-tier function structure? Is it for the wealthy, for those with the time and the capacity and the education, then it's much easier to be healthy, and so actually it's an interesting anecdotal story. You see this shirt here, it's Best Friends. It's a Best Friends is a no-kill animal shelter in a town called Kanab in Utah. We went to 3 years ago, and because we were driving in a 35-foot motorhome, you couldn't drive up. They didn't allow. There was nowhere to park up there. So when we got to Kanab, we were touring all around the sort of the west of America. When we got to Kanab, I had to get a hire car, and then so we could drive the family up there and have a wonderful time with all the animals. And this lady, I forget her name. She was lovely. She came to pick me up from where we were parked up to take me to the hire car place, the local little independent, so you could hire the car. And then when she was driving me back, she's asked something like, "How's America treating you so far?" You know, and I've been there quite a few times. I was like, "Well, it's wonderful," and blah blah blah. And then we got on to food, and I said, "Well, at the minute we're just ordering starters because you don't need a main course in American-sized portions and all this sort of stuff." And then it's sort of, you know, and then we kind of got on. She kind of raised it onto health, and she was slightly overweight and maybe obese. I don't know. She was very open about it, and she said, I cannot afford, and I don't think she was making excuses. She said, I cannot afford to eat healthily. So this is how much a packet of blueberries costs, and this is how much a packet of Captain Crunch or whatever one of their sugary cereals is cost. And we went through, and we actually sat in the car for an extra 15 minutes talking about it. And that's when it really struck me that America, for using an example, is really hard place to maintain health through your dietary input. And I wonder if now's the time to get into that Ansel Keys piece, because that seems to be quite.
I suppose just on that. It is more expensive, I think, to eat. Certainly keto, because just the amount of protein and sort of the high quality protein is expensive. Eggs are pretty cheap, and you know, I think some of it is there are choices, but I think that it is more expensive to and I suppose it's that resource. It costs more in both time and money to prep stuff fresh, to not be relying on processed. I think the resource in terms of time to learn like what you should be eating, what you like what types of things, and it's why that coaching piece comes in, because actually the having trusted sources, and there's so much bad information. Like anybody that sort of starts off from scratch trying to learn nutrition, like there's so many people spouting information out there saying that they're experts when actually in reality, can they get into the and it's I quite enjoy sometimes getting into the science and being like, you don't know anything. I'll do 6 eggs on a morning for breakfast. That's pretty cheap. In terms of cost for compared to it probably is a bit more, but it's only a little bit more than a bowl of cereal is 6 eggs scrambled up. Like, there we go, done in a bowl. Carry on.
Lots of butter and then some bacon. I know I eat too much bacon. You clarified that to me. I'm going to get all forms of carcinogens.
Well, it's a form of processing, isn't it? It's so you mentioned earlier how rubbish you felt when with the processed food, and if you can't grow it or kill it, don't eat it. Is pretty
So Alex, maybe explain the difference between keto and Paleolithic and how it overlaps, because I think I do a kind of combination of the two.
You'll be testing me on the definition of Paleolithic. So I see Paleolithic as essentially caveman type thing. That if cavemen were eating it and you can hit it over the head with a club, or you can pick it off a tree, then that's pretty much about it. But go on, sorry.
No, sorry, man, but I stretch that to the bacon, because I know I make jerky, and that was just basically getting some meat and you whack it on a hot stone and maybe salt it or something to extend its shelf life. And so bacon, I don't know, bacon's cured kind of similarly, isn't it? I mean, it's not a stretch to think that people were eating some form of bacon 160,000 years ago. Is it?
Yeah,
It is.
No, I mean, I suppose I suppose it depends how processed it. Like if it's literally just salted, then yeah, you're right. It's like we've been salting food for years. If actually you're putting all sorts of antioxidants and preservatives and basically other chemicals on it to stop it from going bad, then that's processing. And the same. I mean, you can even take processing down to like cereals, like the grinding of flour is a processing, and it changes where you break it down in your gut. So like you will absorb, because that's why we have teeth, to increase the surface area to allow our enzymes in our saliva and our stomach to access to get more surface area onto the stuff that you're eating to break it down faster. If all of that work's already mechanically being done for you, you're going to absorb it earlier and faster. So particularly if it's something that's like if it's starch, if it's a cereal, your flour, for example, that has got a exponentially increased surface area compared to what it had when it was growing, because your teeth don't grind it down that much. So your gut's going to break that down much faster. You're going to absorb it much faster, so you're going to have a much bigger spike in your blood sugar, which then requires a much bigger secretion of insulin to control that blood sugar. So it's all of that, how that processing side of it then works to have an impact further down the line.
Alex, I just want to say you just explained the reasons behind processed food being bad in a way that I can digest in about a minute. There's brilliant. So that's thank you very much. I hope some of our 14 audience. No, very good. I just wanted to mention so the challenges of eating kind of like keto or eating to a regime that is not sort of your standard behavior, especially with, for example, Alice, my wife, she's doing something else. She's doing like she obviously doesn't need to, but she's doing Weight Watchers or something, and then so she's eating all this and loads of like grains and legumes and things, and I'm trying to eat just meat and cheese and a bit of avocado, and so it does, again, it's like we've got to cook 2 meals and you got to do more shopping, and so it does put little challenges on it on you in order to achieve that. And I just wanted to mention another anecdotal thing. When I lived in Amsterdam when I was about 20 for a couple of years, and I had a mate over there called Barry, who was a legend. And one day we decided to go snowboarding, but we didn't want to go snowboarding. We couldn't afford to go to like the Alps. So I went into a travel agent in somewhere in Amsterdam, and they said, well, have you ever thought of Bulgaria? I said, about nothing, no, really, especially not skiing. So they said, well, they do have some ski lifts. So this is about 28 years ago now. So we ended up going out to Bansko, which is this old sort of communist ski lift area, like with one T-bar, and it was beautiful. But when we landed there, okay, we got picked up by the travel agent and a taxi guy, and the travel agent, this lady, was sitting in the front seat, and she bent back between the seats to Barry and I with a really excited look on her face and said, "Here, these are for you." That's what I presume she said, because I didn't really speak English. And it was a brown bag of 4 oranges. I was like, okay, thanks very much, oranges, brilliant. Yep. And then we got to Bansko, which is up in the Pyrenean Mountains, and it became quite clear that everything that we were eating and drinking, and to an extent, I think I don't know who it was, but someone was smoking, but everything was sort of grown, butchered, and produced locally, from on a local farm for all the food. We at one point, which was interesting. And then I'm getting to a point here. And then I met a local ski instructor called Mitko, local dude, still know a little bit. And then we ran out of cash. And then so I said, I'll just go to the bank with our MasterCard and whatever. Went to the bank and said, oh, we don't do MasterCard. And I was like, oh, bugger. And then they said, well, there is one bank. There's one ATM at the American University in this other town, I forget its name, about 80 kilometers away. So, what? Okay, fine. So I said, Mitko heard about it. He said, oh, I will drive you. I'll get my friend and we will drive. And so I said, all right, we'll pay for petrol and all that sort of stuff. And we got to this American University thing, and we got the cash out of the ATM. And then Mitko was like, oh, I'll buy you a hot dog. I was like, no, man, we'll buy you a hot dog. And there was this absolutely appalling hot dog stand, like something out of New York, but the hot dogs were horrific, but the amount of excitement that Mitko and his mate had about it was revelationary. And then we kind of realized there was no fast food in Bansko at all. Now this is very unscientific, but all I have to say is we did not see, and we were young and single, we did not see one unsmoking hot babe. Like everyone, all the women were just smoking hot physically in terms of faces, either or, but the bodies were just holy living. Okay, and then I've been going back to Bansko since then. Last went back probably about 3 years during COVID. Actually, I just got stuck in there for 2 weeks, and that's no longer the case. Now, that's, as I say, it's hugely unscientific. But now you can eat McDonald's, you can eat everything. That proliferation of processed fast food, it's just been a bit of a tragedy. And I'll shut up in a minute. I used to go to Varna on the Black Sea in Bansko, and I spent a couple of weeks there with a mate. And I used to come back from clubbing at like 7 in the morning or something, and there was this sort of beach bar, and I'd go in, and they just make for me this huge glass Pyrex bowl of chopped tomatoes, because their tomatoes over there are like the best tomatoes I've ever had in the world, and I grow them here fairly well. And I just eat this huge bowl of tomatoes because it just tastes so good. And so when you can get food of that quality, and I remember going the first time I flew back into London, I spent a week in London. I went around all the local stalls, like Italians, Turks, everyone who's got a reputation for having good tomatoes. They were good, but they're just a different level. So there's some stories about.
So I mean,
crap.
in terms of the percentages of overweight, obese, it's just so it's when you I know you dropped in slightly earlier the Ansel Keys and the introducing of American dietary guidelines and the fat phobia element. But if you look at from the introduction of the, I think it was like 1965, something like that, the dietary guidelines were American dietary guidelines, and the American Heart Association introduced those, the guidance on what we should eat. If you look at the obesity levels then compared to now, it's pretty much just a linear increase since then to now. The photo, you look at old photos of the seafront when people were sunbathing in the 60s, 70s, like it was rare to see somebody who was overweight, and now it's rare not to see somebody that is overweight. And I think that fat phobia is it's difficult to put the two together, as in the fat phobia, the consumption of fat. I think it was Ivor Cummins that said it once, that blaming cholesterol for heart attacks is like blaming paramedics for car crashes. Yes, it's there afterwards, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's that caused it. The cholesterol and the plaques that are formed on the walls of blood vessels that cause heart attacks isn't necessarily caused by eating that fat. There's so many other factors that cause the buildup of atherosclerosis, so the plaques on the walls. The fact that in diabetes, that diabetes is one of the biggest risk factors for developing heart disease, and it's the inflammation, it's the things that's damaging the walls of your blood vessel that causes the plaques there trying to fix the problem. The paramedics are there trying to fix the car crash. They didn't cause it in the first place. And I think we've been indoctrinated over years to be terrified of dietary fat, and it is an energy source. So that there is elements. I mean, Ivor Cummins goes into a lot of detail, doesn't he, about LDLs and HDLs and the different types of fats. But just avoiding, as a general rule, avoiding highly processed, highly sugary, starchy food, and the meat and two veg is a classic sort of staple diet for a reason that we've really moved away from.
Yeah, but it's just almost down to the semantics. It's like don't eat fat, otherwise you'll get fat and die. And it's kind of like, it's not. I'm thinking about when I was a kid. Fat's bad for you, right? It's good, tastes good, but it's bad for you. And it's like a special occasion. I'm gonna eat everyone else's bacon rind because they don't want it because it's fat. Yeah. I'm gonna eat it because it tastes amazing. So that's I think just down to that makes things quite challenging. So should we just quickly run through, because I think this is I had no idea about this, and as I say, I like a conspiracy, but increasingly so conspiracies are proven to be factual situations that have been swept under the carpet or modified into a slightly new carpet that means you can't actually. That's a shit analogy. You can't see through the carpet. Anyway, you take my point.
I don't want this to be seen as alternative. Like it's not. So the public health collaboration. So it's PHC UK. They're a really good resource for challenging conventional dietary advice. And my experience of coaching patients through it, particularly for metabolic syndrome, so high blood pressure, diabetes, certainly high cholesterol and your lipid problems, it has an incredible effect. So I don't want it to be seen as alternative. That there is a lot of information out there and it's quite hard to get through, but just reducing the amount of process. Meat and 2 veg, you literally can't go wrong with meat and 2 veg.
Yeah. So Ansel Keys, right? He's quite a lot of the sort of natural fats equals heart disease. I've overly simplified that, but just for laymen like myself, that a lot of that sort of perception comes from a chap called Ansel Keys, back in the sort of 50s and 60s. Well, he lived to So Ansel Keys, he K rations. I didn't know this. I looked this up. So Ansel Keys designed K rations. That's why they're called K rations, which was the short. It was designed to be a short-term food source for American GIs during the Second World War, and it did fairly well. You can always find detractors, but then he did the 7 Nation study or something during the 50s to the 70s, where basically, as I understand it, he managed to assign responsibility of death through cardiac complications, the rest I don't know the terms, I'm sorry, to a high natural fat diet. Do you want to
Yeah, it's a while since I've looked into. So the 7 countries study was I think what Ansel Keys based most of his advice around, and I think that it's now understood that the 7 countries study was actually the best 7 countries from 22 that he studied that showed what he wanted / was being paid to show. That dietary fat was bad and that we should eat more sugar and refined cereals instead. The fact that he picked the ones that were showing, it's pretty bad science as far as I can tell, and what most people think now for sort of 50 years down the line. There's a book called Big Fat Surprise. So Nina Tickles, I'm saying that wrong. T-Schultz. She's a journalist, so she's an investigative journalist that looked into the story of fat dietary guidelines, etc. It sort of digs into actually all of this was paid for, but it's paid for science by big food companies that had an agenda and wanted to articulate something. But unfortunately, we've then based the majority of our dietary advice on those legacy recommendations.
That's bonk. So because I did a little bit of research into the Ansel Keys, and you'll find there's contemporary reports or articles coming out from people who are trying to actually back up Ansel Keys to an extent, and those who are still saying no, it was a flawed. And then there's one guy who I found a website earlier this morning that was saying that actually, and I found a few others that say actually, like the 7 country. Some people say, well, why didn't you include France? Because France has always had a strong correlation between high natural fats and actually living quite long because of their sort of like historical diet. And apparently it wasn't the data. The local scientists didn't want to take part, apparently. And then like in Greece, I think it was during Lent or something. It was that a different data set because of the eating habits changed through religious reasons through that time. And there's some other people I found who said actually the science was good. And he's been slagged off, but it's so much information out there. You don't know who to believe or to trust. But I didn't realize that he'd been paid. He was getting 200k $200,000 a year for this study. Actually, I just saw that this morning.
Yeah,
So
I
that's
mean,
right. But
it's quite wide. The Mediterranean diet thing. There's lots of talk now about how the Mediterranean diet is a healthy diet. They live for a long time. I mean, there's lots of aspects to that in terms of sunlight, vitamin D, lots of exercise, etc., etc., etc. But it does sort of run in the face of a lot of the conventional fat advice. Well, yeah, there's a pure study, so the pure study as well. So I think it's prospective urban rural epidemiological study, or it's like 125,000 people. So if you just Google pure study, it shows like the exact opposite, that again, it's that refined carbohydrates, not good for living a long time. Actually, eating a bit more fat, it's fine.
So Ansel Keys, he moved. I didn't realize this. I found this morning. He moved to the Mediterranean, somewhere in Italy, I think, and he lived his last couple of 3 decades there, 2.5 decades there, and he died at 101. So following his own advice. So it's kind of like, well, fair enough, mate. Good for you. But then, as you pointed out to me, the refined, what is it? What's it called? Where is it? The Sugar Research Foundation. Like the Harvard report that was commissioned by an organization in America called the Sugar Research Foundation, which has changed its name to like sugar something nowadays. But it was a Harvard report, 1967. It was called Project 226. They were paid $6,500 for it at the time, which equates to $50,000 today. And it was basically a report that reviewed lots of other white papers and output of the time, either looking at processed sugars and fats in the causation towards heart disease, because heart disease was going rapidly up at that time. And then so what they did is they reviewed multiple papers, this Harvard crew, and I can't remember the detail. I found it a couple of weeks ago. They sort of like they negated certain reports, and some of the reasons they negated it was pretty, even to a non-scientist, were pretty thin reasons for it. And it basically came out saying they kind of portrayed that dietary fat and cholesterol, not sugar, was the primary dietary cause of heart disease. So that was 1967, and I think since then that's really, and they kind of acknowledged now that was dodgy. But and thanks very much for the last, how many years is that? It's like 60, almost 70 years. People have been dying because he wanted to make a profit. And if you look at, I found some graphs looking at sugar consumption and then the recorded levels of diabetes that I can only see from about 1900. They kind of peaked up a little bit. And then you've got, I presume, a dip, which I presume was the First World War, where things were hard to get hold of. Then it goes up a bit, then a dip, the Second World War, and then just after, a little bit where this report came out, it's just the pitch of the graph going up in terms of sugar consumption and diabetes. It's like, I don't know, the Eiger, face of the Eiger. It's particularly alarming.
I can't see it on my shelf. I've got a medical text that I bought. It's from like 1912, because we knew the answer. We knew that before pre-insulin. So when it was when we didn't really know the difference between type 1 and type 2 diabetes, we just had people that had. We knew people that had high blood sugars and they got really, really sick really quickly. We called it diabetes. And there's I'll see if I can find it. There's a book that I've got from I think it's 1912, and it articulates in there about that for diabetes you cut starchy carbohydrates and reduce sugar, and we knew the answer then, and we just sort of forgot it and started blaming all sorts of other things. But the fact is that we consume stuff that actually we're not designed to eat. It is really bad for us. It's really inflammatory. It puts us blood sugars through the roof, and our bodies really fight against it and don't like it. So I think there's lots of room for improvement. I am quite nervous about giving very generic dietary advice though. I'm in quite a privileged position in that I get to coach patients like one-on-one, and I get lots of data. So if it's not just fire and forget. Like I'll see them, they'll try, we'll have a conversation. I get them to keep a food diary, and we'll have a conversation about it. And there is some test and adjust, and we can. So I've got a circle that I use about sort of data, insight, and interventions, and it just keeps feeding that around.
Yeah.
The more data I can get on them, so having regular blood tests, I can see what their markers are doing, and things should be moving in the right direction. If they're not, then I'm starting to ask some questions and actually what else is going on here and why we're not doing it. I think it's really difficult to give completely carte blanche generic advice that is good for everybody. But I think certainly the process bit, there's no two ways about it. Eating meat and broccoli is better for you than processed, right?
So and I say this quite a lot recently, and I don't mean it flippantly, but what we need perhaps is, because the government's complicit to it. I know there's they put a sugar tax on and all the little bits and bobs, but if you were serious about and I go as far as to national security. If you're serious about your national security, you want the well-being, both physical and, as I said at the beginning, absolutely it does for me, affects my mental well-being, and therefore longevity, resilience, productivity, blah blah blah. If you're serious about your national security, that you should be putting that above profit and taxes, and which of the sugar federations are your mates in the Isles of Whitehall, for example. And so I mean it's incredibly, as we said, it's incredibly difficult to eat healthily easily. Do you not think that there should be some form, and so like a good war would accelerate the fact that the supply chain would be reduced, the availability of sugar would be reduced, and maybe it's almost like a decentralization of everything. I normally talk about it with technology, as in we can no longer rely upon microchips from Taiwan or China. We have to sort of start building this capability ourselves in-house on our British Isles. Same thing for food. We'd have to eat what we can grow, and there wouldn't be the time to process as much. So it would be a massive culture shock, as he talked about behavior, but what option would you have? And surely that would be a good thing. Should we not orchestrate something like that?
We probably shouldn't orchestrate it now. We probably shouldn't cause it. And I'm sure that there are
war, but
I'm sure there are easier ways. Actually, I mean, I'm not sure that there are easier ways. But yeah, I'm not sure I'm not sure there is a good war. I get what you're saying, but it seems the public health problem, we can maybe get after that without causing the death of millions of people.
But okay, but no, but on a practical, because you do have a very innovative brains, and I'm not expecting an answer now, because there are other innovative brains out there. But yeah, tomorrow would be good. But okay, short of a war and short of like supply chains, like we're running out of fuel, or the Houthis that's locked down, like all the supply chains from particular areas or equivalents, and everything shoots up in price, and then we can't afford to eat anything other than carrots, and if we can grow them, which is a lost skill. How can we? Because it's just depressing. That beach photo, I sent you one recently that you talked about them, that from the 70s, of like a beach in wherever it was in the south of France. Everyone's like just fit, and it's just depressing.
Shifting, it's really difficult, because the amount of money that we spend on the NHS anyway. But not necessarily increasing funding upstream. So upstream interventions, that we are so busy dealing with the consequences of poor health that we're not investing enough in actually upstream interventions. Everybody should have access to health and fitness facilities. And we do a certain amount of that now. Nutrition education, more nutrition education in schools, and that sort of thing. But yeah, shifting that upstream intervention so people know that what the consequences of what they're doing to themselves. And I think there's a real convenience to that. We do a lot of fat shaming. We do a lot of blaming of individuals who have got themselves into poor physical state, when actually they're in a complete obesogenic environment. Like everything that they're surrounded by is designed to make them as fat as possible and as unhealthy as possible. Be it sat scrolling on your phone on social media, be it like sat watching TV, or be it eating fast food. Everything that we immerse people in, it's always going to be harder to eat healthy. It's always going to be harder to exercise, and like anything that we can do to shift funding upstream to help change some of those behaviours, I think would pay dividend further downstream.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm now going to go out and say something intensely unscientific. I'm going to run it past you because I was having this conversation with a parent the other day, and it came on to diet. Rather surprisingly, came on to diet. So from purely personal observation, I like to think I'm quite observational, quite perceptive. The level of children that I interface with, having young kids myself, and so at school and friends, and also reading and general wider observations, I can't help but notice that the level of neurodiversity. And so if we look at neurodiversity being a continuum, and then we've all got aspects of many things on it. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I've got people think I've got ADHD, and I may well do. Who knows? I'm going to do a podcast about that. It's fascinating. And then so one of my children's got like dyslexia, or potentially dyslexia, but or suspected autism, moderate autism. Okay, fine, all cool. But the amount of people I know in my immediate circle whose kids have got some form of neurodiversity, I see a lot of it about out there. And then I know, and so I'm not trying to be sensationalist or conspiratorial when I say, and I'm sorry, Alice, I always use her as the mainstream media scientist who's like a perfect foil for all my perhaps slightly zany concepts. I go, Alice, don't you think back to when you were at school? How many kids do you think were on the neurodiversity continuum? Oh, but they weren't. It wasn't all recognised back then. Yeah, I know, but okay. But how many kids were like being disruptive or having troubles that you could now be with your education and our awareness could now be, oh, they were possibly ADHD, or they were possibly ADD, or whatever, autistic, or whatever. And I do that, and I've been doing it for a long time now, and I can't think there are that many that must, compared to the quantity there are today. And so when I'm in a moderately friendly space with people who I don't talk to that often, and I feel that I can bring this up as a form of very crap scientific research. So I did this the other day with someone whose son is got autistic, clearly autistic, and I got some challenges, behavioural challenges, and all sorts of stuff. And so I said, look, there's no science behind this, but I can't help but think, what are your feelings, observations about the number of identified or perceived children who are neurodiverse? And they said it is rocketed, and they work in health education, and they work with kids. I didn't know that at the time, and then I had to sit back for a change. It's normally me rabbiting on, but this parent rabbited on in a fascinating way. And I shouldn't have said that, but she eventually brought it back, a lot of it back to diet. I always go, oh, and you'll love this, I love to see your face when I bring it a little bit back to vaccines. I don't know, I'm not a scientist, but it's worth looking at because there's enough discussion about it. Anyway, but she brought it back to diet, and I just wanted to know if you had any thoughts about that, because and also people who brought Alzheimer's. Where's a list of other things? So yeah, dementia and Alzheimer's. My father unfortunately has got mixed dementia now, and it's just made me start thinking about me selfishly, but also dad obviously. But it is kind of like how much is it accepted that diet might have things to do with our mental faculties? Bearing in mind that the very first of this bit of podcast, I said the best thing for me about the keto and no alcohol experience I've had, physical, yeah, but it's the mental. It's absolutely mind blowing. What's the general sort of Western medicine consensus about that?
So I think the first bit is I am very cautious when it comes to the whole vaccine thing. I think that it's very easy to vilify processes that are super complex, and the Andrew Wakefield and his MMR vaccine stuff caused so much damage, and so many people didn't get MMR vaccine and then went on to have really bad outcomes with, and the cases of measles went through the roof because of really shit science that was jumped on by conspiracy theorists and sort of pushed. So there is an element of, like, we don't have smallpox anymore. Like, vaccines work to a certain extent. Like, well, not even to a certain extent. Vaccines work. There is always going to be extremes at both end of sometimes where we might not need it. Not everybody gets chickenpox vaccine. There is a chickenpox vaccine now. It's a choice. It depends on risk and benefit. But I think it's really dangerous to sort of lump all that together. That said, with dietary stuff and behaviours, clearly there is a very linear correlation with, you give kids Sunny D and they go mad. Like, we've known that. I remember, I'm a kid in the 90s, early 2000s. You give kids too much Sunny D and they go absolutely bonkers. There are the blue Smarties, etc., etc. Too many food colorings, too much processed, caffeine. All of that. There are links between behaviour and what you put in your body. How many kids these days are drinking Red Bull and Monster on their way to school? Like, they miss breakfast. They miss breakfast, and their breakfast is 2 cans of crisps and a can of Monster. It's heavily marketed. That is going to have an impact on behaviour. Like the taurine, guanine, caffeine, and all of the other colours and things that go in them. Like, that is not a natural diet that we should be feeding our kids. That is not a good breakfast. There is not a good breakfast, and that also didn't happen as much 20 or 30 years ago. So it's difficult to say absolute causation, but there is definitely an association, in my opinion, between what you feed kids and behaviour.
But okay, so but more, and I'm going to actually, I've just decided I'm going to spend some of my time trying to look more into any evidence that's worth listening to about, first of all, the question is, has there been an actual increase in neurodiversity, or is it just a combination of an increase and an increase in awareness? What is going on? Because it's all very well and good for me to sit here and spout all stuff. I remain convinced. I trust my gut and my instincts and my observations. Normally they're pretty good, but and then it kind of comes down to, what is it through? That's maybe through transgenerational, or through your parents a little bit. How do you end up with that neurodiversity? Quite commonly, I guess, born with it. I don't know. I need to look into it. But I just there was that saying by Steve Jobs. I think, who knows? It was one of those things on LinkedIn, which, I mean, LinkedIn makes me vomit, but I need it in a minute. But it was one of his 5 retrospective considerations on his deathbed, is like, treat food like your medicine before medicine becomes your food. And even when I read that when I was younger, when I was, you feel immortal. I can eat what I like. I'll be fit. I look at, I'm fit and healthy. I'm going to last forever. It's some form of brain sustainment that I think we get naturally in order to help us get out of bed each day, because otherwise the pressing realization of our existential brevity is a challenge. Anyway, but and even back then I was like, yeah, he's right. That's got to be right. And actually, I'm going to go all the way back to Ice-T. He's a West Coast rapper. I don't know if you know Ice-T, but
I don't know. Actually,
no, hang on.
Is this the person that does the intro, the intro music?
So no, that's a guy called Skins. He's a jungle producer. So when I was in Salisbury, I saw this at HMV when I was about 12. It's like, look at this cassette tape, kids. And it's Ice-T, OG.
You'll have to explain, and it's amazing. Is.
Yeah, I know. I know. The kids are like, oh, what's that? Anyway, and he's got a line, and it goes, where is it? He goes, others drink 40s and I drink milk. So 40s are like alcohol. Like, have you seen Boys in the Hood, when someone gets shot and they pour like these alcohol beers, normally 40 ounces beers on the ground in memory of fallen homies.
I'll smile and nod.
Yeah, okay, fine. But so I remember because I was like deep in like hedonism for most of my young adult life, and so when one of my heroes, because he's a social commentator, is IT, he's fucking dead on. When he was going, I drink 40s. No, they drink 40s whilst I drink milk. I took it really badly. I was like, I don't wanna. I stopped listening to his music because I felt bad. Deep down, I knew he was right. I should be drinking milk, not absinthe. Right, I knew that, but it wasn't. It didn't fit in with. It didn't fit in with my particular trajectory at that point. So I forget where I was going with that, but it's yeah, these little things that we know deep down must be right, okay, but it's so hard to do them, even when they serve. When observational, the causation is God, do that, you'll feel good. As I said at the beginning, I actively forget. Something in my brain makes me go, no, it's not that good. Oh, don't worry about it, just have another beer. And I just don't know how. If we've got the whole mainstream media, well, a lot of mainstream media and advertising bucks and like the industrial complex basically telling us to eat crap, how can we meaningfully change that? How can I stop my kids from eating crap without being a fascist?
So, I mean, you were talking about neurodiversity, and I think one of the things that we need to be conscious of is neurodiversity. Thinking differently is good. Like from an innovation perspective, definitely, you need a room full of if everybody thinks the same, you're not gonna improve anywhere near as fast as actually if you've got a load of people that think differently. And I think the thing to potentially focus on here is where's the pathology. So what's the problem? It's similar to like what's the job to be done. Where's the line for the problem here? Actually thinking a bit differently, being a bit different outside the normal sort of bandwidth of normality. Actually, that's fine. Where's the pathology? Actually, are these really unhappy? Are they not functioning? Are they? What's the levels of depression, etc. That is a pathology. But just being diverse and being a bit different, I'm fine. That might be increasing, and that's probably something we should celebrate. Like I'm fine with that bit. Actually, having the most unhappy teenagers ever, which is something that's been spouted recently, that's not good because that's pathology, and that's
Yeah,
like having lots of people that are unhappy isn't good. But it's not just and there is probably an element of food in here, but there's lots of other. It's association and causation. There's loads of other factors, like with the first generation, with anywhere near the amount of tech that we've got. Like how much time are kids spending bored these days? Like when
yeah,
you tell a kid to just go sit in a corner and entertain themselves, like we had to do for lots of time. That like, there's
yeah,
no gaps in their entertainment anymore. Like actually,
yeah.
being bored's probably quite good for you. Like using your imagination to
Absolutely.
come up with something new. So yeah, there probably is an element of processed food, but there's probably we've made so many big changes to society with tech and everything else. I think it's risky to just blame it all on food, but there's no doubt going to be some in association there.
Okay, that's really interesting. So what you said about I hope you don't mind. I'm gonna reference you here.
Okay.
You have an element of neurodiversity. Can I reference that?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Is it too
But
late? I've done it.
I'm dyslexic, so I'm
Yeah, fine.
dyslexic.
So, so my journey down this sort of, I'm going off on one now, but I don't care.
Yeah.
So the neurodiversity was that when we met one of a DSEI one, the first time we went for a coffee and we just getting to know each other a bit better. And that was the point where I was like, you're telling me what you've been up to. I was like, oh my God, he's got like an unrestrained, innovative brain. It's just, and then I was like, oh my God, how does he operate in the military? Like he said at the beginning, where there's all these processes and boxes you have to. So good on him. And then he just mentioned that you were quite challenged to be you were challenged by dyslexia, unrecognised dyslexia for a while. And I don't know, how did you become a doctor? I've seen the piles of books you have to read and all this stuff. So I was like, oh bloody hell! And then my son, he got sort of pre-diagnosed with dyslexia. He'd write or whatever it is. He'd write like sentences. He couldn't spell. I put that down to my parenting and teaching during COVID because I'm a shit teacher. But then he started writing sentences perfectly the wrong way around without realizing. And I was like, I'm quite smart, right? Quite a flexible brain. I can't do that without really struggling and working my way through. So I was like, okay. And then as soon as we got this letter back saying, yeah, we're going to look at him for dyslexia, I was like, oh no, he's not perfect. Okay. And I was like, oh my goodness, how am I? Because his sister's pretty good in many ways. And then I was like, and so the first person I called was you. I was like, Alex, I don't know if you remember. I said, Alex, I hope you don't mind, but calling out about sex yet. My son's been pre-diagnosed with it or something. And he kind of go, what do you wish you'd known, or your parents had known, or whatever, when you were younger? Basically trying to figure out how best to deal with this situation and support him. And you very clearly made it evident to me that the problem lies not with him at all. It lies with the environment, therefore me and his mum, but mostly me because mum's pretty solid. In order to enable that, I was like, okay, fine. And then you were very helpful there. And then I was working in mental health and AI, and then so I became more sort of into like PTSD and neurodiversity and all this sort of stuff, trying to align solutions in AI, not large language models, human-based rules, much cooler stuff. And then so I became quite familiar with sort of neurodiversity there. And during that process, it became quite clear to me, those who have like you said a minute ago, man, those who sort of like left brain, a bit more dominant, they're far more creative. They think outside the box. And then I met another guy who'd been hired by a major international corporation to actively recruit and create an environment for like it was 1,000 neurodiverse apprentices. And then because this company had recognized they want to think slightly differently. And so then and I was like, ooh, dyslexia, nice, left brain thinking, good one, son. That's good. And then they came back and said, nah, he's not really dyslexic. And if he is, he's kind of figured out how to work his way through it. And I was like, no. But then it's become a bit more apparent that he might have like a light form of autism. I'm sure you won't mind me talking about this, I'm sure, in years to come. He won't go, oh, dad. But and it's kind of, and I'm from the way he is at the minute, and I've had experiences with other kids I've known quite well, is he's either got a level of neurodiversity which enables him to be really good at and special at some aspects without it being too like he's socially adept. He's got a few sensory issues, but that's about it. But they're all manageable, and I suspect maybe it's like confirmation bias that he's got the computational wherewithal to develop mechanisms. Which because people said I've got ADHD and like some people who know, and then we've done a few tests and I'm like, well, if I do or not, I'm 48 years old, I'm fairly functional, and I've got these mechanisms to operate. And maybe there's a few areas I could improve in, and I'm going to do a podcast about that. It's fascinating. But it says maybe, and so I get really excited now that he's got this perfect balance of not thinking normally. He'll come up with ideas. I'll ask him questions and he'll come up with ideas. I'm like, first of all, I'm like, why didn't I think of that? Because I think I'm smart. You're obviously not. And then how the hell did he get there? And then I ask him how, and it's just it's absolutely fascinating. So I'm hoping, I've been banging on about neurodiversity being more prevalent, but that hopefully it goes hand in hand with the fact that the environment for neurodiversity is becoming more supportive and what's the word when you beginning with X when you
extrapolate.
You make better. No, not extrapolate. I've had this trouble recently a lot with this word. Anyway, oh fuck it. You leverage it. You leverage it. You leverage the situation.
Yeah, I think going back to that, where's the pathology? So I met him. He's great. Like there's he does really well in lots and lots of arenas, and actually in the spectrum of normal, he's coping. He may be slightly one side, the other side on various aspects of it, but he's a really good kid, and like actually he's coping really well. And there may be an element of his father's slightly off to one side of a spectrum, and some of this might be learned, and some of this might just be that's him. Like if there's no pathology there, let's just celebrate it. Like
what does pathology mean?
Like there's something wrong. It's
okay.
Something not working well. So yeah, like a medical problem. So diabetes is a pathology. It's a type of problem. Like it's actually if it's not broken, don't fix it, I suppose is what I'm saying.
Yeah. Okay, excellent. Well, so I think I'd like to do some more research about the neurodiversity because I keep giving this sort of cursory statement. It's a bit pointless, really. I need to look into it. But if you hear of anything,
Yeah, Ernst and Young did
I,
a dyslexic advantage. They did a report of the future jobs, and and actually how dyslexia is potentially an advantage for future roles. And yeah, so it's worth looking at.
it's fascinating.
Richard Branson's a big. So there's he's a big advocate for dyslexia as well.
Okay, that's cool. Yeah, brilliant. It's really interesting. Right. I've got one question at the end for you. Is there anything else you'd like to say?
No, I mean I'm quite enjoying this. It's
Yeah,
my first time.
it's
It's my
very
first time. So
yeah, well, I think you're a natural. And can we do some more, please?
yeah, absolutely.
No, good. That doesn't
So
sound very compelling.
there was a topic that you said that you wanted to talk about with me and my lady wife that we discovered.
Oh yeah!
What we
Oh God! Oh fine. Okay. Oh yeah, no, fine. Okay, we might have to have a wee break,
Okay.
if that's okay, because I need a wee. But this is no. I can't believe I forgot that. Okay, fine. No, that's brilliant. So I'm going to ask you one question, then we'll have a wee break, then we'll come back and talk about that other thing, if that's all right.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Okay, right. So this just I don't get it, right? And I asked my kids this. Do you get this? Who wants to be a doctor, right? What I'm fascinated in your personal experience because it's other people, the secretions in like blood and like
Yeah.
just other people, and I'm a fairly generous person. I care about people, I guess, a little bit, but there's no way I could do it. And I asked the kids, and they were like, no, and they're lovely because they're kids. So why did you become a doctor? May I ask that, please?
Yeah. So, I mean, for my initial response there is it makes me a bit sad that like people don't want to do it because I absolutely love it. I always have done, and so I think the bit for me is partly detective. So anybody that likes a detective program, then like there's a huge overlap between being a detective and medicine because somebody presents with a problem and you've got to do some investigation to work out what's going on, and then the other bit is like so there's dramatized TV programs about management consultancy. Like management consultancy, honestly, they do an analysis. So they'll go in, they'll be all suave and sophisticated, come in like they know more about the problem than the person than the company that they're going in trying to fix. So they'll swan in and do an analysis of said problem. They'll then go away for a few days, charge a few £1 million, come up with a solution, then present it to them, and then implement it. So that you do an analysis, come up with a solution, and implement it. It's the same skill set. We've just got to do it in a. We don't. People don't pay us millions of pounds to do it. That we've got to convince them in a way to do it, and that sort of the human challenge of that. That someone might come in really really sad, and they don't really know what's going on. They've got a hugely undifferentiated 17 complex problems all going on at the same time. You've got to do analysis. You've got to, but it's not like you can just say, right, give me this spreadsheet and I want all of the answers to this data set. You've got to actually build that trust early on and sort of get them to talk to you. So really engage with them and get them to sort of to trust you and relax a little bit. And then you've got to sort of unpick where the problems are, and actually there's 17 problems here. We've only got time to fix 2 or 3 of them. Like, what's the biggest problem for you, and what's the biggest problem for me? And then let's like work out a way of moving forward with those that you feel satisfied, and I'm less scared that you're going to leave here and die, because that's the risk. That's the risk to me, that I don't address the problem that I'm worried about, and the risk to you is that you don't get the thing done that you came in to talk about. And then when you've done that analysis, you've then got to immediately come up with a solution, and then prioritize it, and then you've got to convince them to do something about it in 10 minutes.
Yeah. Okay, so I see. So I think you put it across there as a problem-solving challenge.
Yeah.
Which I think, but so I get that, and problem-solving, cool. But it's what about, okay? Just simply put, at what point were you confident that you weren't going to have a blocker over your reaction to blood, for example? or secretions?
So, I mean, pre-med school. So my mum's a nurse. Um,
Okay.
I, I started to articulate that I was interested in doing medicine, and I think I probably in sixth form. I might have even been like year 11. Um, I I like sports medicine, so so I played quite a lot of rugby. I got injured a little bit, and so being looked after by the medical teams playing rugby. So I had some insight there. I used to go watch rugby league, and I'd seen like the doctor run onto the pitch, like in play. So I think that was probably my initial inspiration for medicine. And then when I started to say, oh no, actually, I really like science. I like sports science. I like being fit. I like health. I like that. That all sort of led me to I was doing medicine. So my mum, in her wisdom, took me to a territorial army, as it was in the day, conference or presentation at her hospital. It was a recruiting thing where they did a lecture on bomb blasts and burns that were coming back from, I think it was Iraq at the time. And she took me along with the intent of putting me off. And I think it was probably a combination of one being quite young to be exposed to. I mean, it was very graphic.
How old were you?
Probably 16.
Okay. Yeah.
16. So she took me along, and she spoke to the colonel at the time that was presenting, who was a plastic surgeon, and yeah, he was like, if you're his mum, if you're content and it's fine, like he said, and I sat through it, and one, I was sort of inspired by the level of trauma care that was being delivered in the austere environments, but also it was really graphic, and I was like, yeah, no, I'm fine with that. Like, it didn't. I think it was more of a desire to want to help with that sort of thing. Like that stuff still happened, and I mean, it's been one of those things that stuck with me my entire career. Like, this bad stuff still happens whether you're there or not. So if you've got the skill set to be able to do something about it, then actually I'm not put off by that. It's more like, cool, they need me even more to be able to deliver that. And the time pressure bit, that you deliver absolutely the most value in the first few minutes of an injury. Then you know, if they don't survive that bit, they're not going to survive the rest of it, are they? So that initial pre-hospital response is where a huge amount of value is. Paramedics have the best job in the world.
Okay. Oh, cool. Okay. Right. Lovely. Well, you're a goddamn hero. So let's go for. I'm going for a wee anyway, and then I'll see you in a moment. And we're back. So just a little bit now about a totally different subject. I think one that if anyone's listened to any of the other podcasts, comes up quite a lot. And it, when you came down recently down to Cornwall, and we met your other half. Better half, I think it's clear to say.
Much better.
And we were talking, it came out that this subject is a little bit controversial. What's the word? It's a little bit frowned upon by lots of people, functioning members of society, or so they say. It's one that I've talked about a lot since COVID. Openly, I don't care what anyone thinks, and the general reaction is like, you nutter. But increasingly so, as this little story will tell, that may be changing. And so, do you want to tell the story? It's just I'm
interested to hear. I'm interested to hear your perception of it.
Okay, fine. So we were standing on the decking, barbecuing in the sun. It was during the summer, and you just walk around our little bit of land here, and we've got the borehole, we've got the polytunnel, we've got the lake and the stream, and I've got, I'm a prepper, not a very good one, but I've actively been prepping, and I've started a bit more prepping recently, actually, Alex, due to the geopolitical situation. I can't help it. And I said it, and it was the first time I met your missus in the flesh, and I'm always conscious of the fact, kind of after I start talking, part of my brain goes, oh, well done, you've let this one out of the bag. And I was going, yeah, no, we need to prep, we need to have this ability, seeds, and, you need a doctor, you need to know a doctor, and all sort of stuff. And then you guys very quickly said, well, we're both preppers. We're both actively mentally engaged in the good sense of prepping. And by prepping, I mean providing access for yourselves to things you'd need should a third world war break out, or the zombies invade, or the supply chains come down, or there'll be another lockdown or more stringent like pandemic reaction. And I think the pair of you have known each other for about 15 years, and I think it's only about a year ago that you both admitted, I don't know how it exactly happened, that you both like prepping. And because you were both, you said you were both quite not embarrassed about it, but you were concerned what the other might think about you. Is that what happened?
Yeah, so I think it's fair to say that both of us were like engaging in the thought process of prepping, being that if and you know prepping it's a word that I don't know, it has connotations of being really outside of normal, and I don't necessarily see it as that. Like it's not something. It's nothing. It's nothing illegal. It's nothing. You
Yeah,
know that is embarrassing. It's nothing that is like. It's literally just having stuff that would help you to survive if something bad
yeah,
happens. And I don't know why. So, but personally, I did have that. Oh, like yeah, Becky's gonna think I'm silly if I was to fully articulate my thought process for the reason why I'm buying this, etc. You know, like
yeah,
I have a 4-wheel drive car. Like I'm not gonna lie that part of the thought process of that is that I don't want to get stuck somewhere if I need
yeah,
to escape. And you know,
yeah,
but I would guarantee that the majority of people that are driving a 4-wheel drive car have had that same thought process.
yeah,
That that
yeah,
and
yeah, yeah,
so
absolutely.
I was sort of articulating or sort of not articulating my full reasons for justifying some of the things that I wanted to get. And you know, as conversations started to, I can't even remember what it was particularly about. I think it was maybe around the fuel strikes. You know, there were the fuel strikes a couple of years back. I was like, it's all
Yeah,
right. We've got 40 liters of diesel in the garage. And she was like, oh, okay, good. And then and like it was sort of, I was like, oh, there wasn't that she didn't follow it up with a question of that's mad, why.
yeah,
It was just
yeah,
like, okay, that's useful. Good, I'm glad.
yeah.
And then sort of we had a very open conversation about it, and she's like, no, I absolutely support you in doing all of this. Like,
No,
and she was probably a little bit further down the line, is that she had a desire to do it, but not necessarily had engaged fully in the what we need to do. But she was like, no, I'm absolutely down with all of this, and I will fully support you in whatever it is you think we need to do. Which I was like, this is free reign for me to go. Like I'm building a bunker. like I haven't done
yeah,
yet,
man.
but yeah, no, I mean I think there's potentially a occupational element to this, that it's really easy for things to go really wrong really quickly, and
Mm,
I don't think I think it's, you know, convenient for us to just not necessarily fully acknowledge that. The fact that Kiev nearly 3 years ago was a cosmopolitan European city.
yeah,
It's really easy for things to go really wrong really quickly, and um, I I I I see it, but partly it's out of interest, and it's that feeling of wanting to be prepared. But you know, it's that I feel I take comfort. It's something that I can do for myself that gives me comfort. It's a lot of it's probably anxiety based. If I was to dig into it from a psychological perspective, it is probably a manifestation of some of my own anxieties that is come out in a practical way. And you know, that anxiety, we were talking about pathology earlier, and I don't think that this is a problem. It doesn't stop me from this anxiety doesn't stop me from doing anything. I still go out in public. I still get, you know, I still fly on planes. I do all of the things that are required for me to exist normally. But that level of anxiety does exist about bad things happening and terror events
yeah.
and everything else. And this is a practical manifestation of something that I can do to reassure myself that actually, if it all does go wrong, then I may be slightly better prepared than if I'd not done anything.
Yeah, absolutely a lovely bit. When during COVID, when I was, I wasn't. People going, "You're panic buying." I go, "Do I look like I'm panicking? I don't think I look like I'm panicking. I'm not panicking. To me, this is just common sense. I don't understand why you're not doing this. If I want to look after my family and myself, this is surely the. And as you say, everything's going to be eaten. That's not like anything's going to go to waste. And yes, if it does, I know when Alice bought the caravan, I didn't want the caravan. I didn't want to be a caravaneer, whatever. That sounds too exciting. A caravan bloke. But when we towed it home under duress, I got there. I was like, you know what, Alice? If everything goes really wrong, we've got a mobile ops center, and
Yeah.
and it was really exciting to have that in the. I've got like I won't go into the list of tools I've got, but all these things kind of make me. You're right. Do kind of probably remove an anxiety. Um, but I know for the fact I call myself a half-ass prepper is because I know what I should have, and I've got lots of it, and probably more than most people. But I don't have a joined-up solution. So all these, this is our daily
Yeah.
life. We've got an arc of points, and we can exist. To prep, you need to join these points up, so there's no break. I've joined some of them, and others are closer, but there's still fundamentally big gaps. I don't have a proper 4x4. I've got an Audi Quattro, which is a sports car. But it's 4x4. But it's not going to get me down a muddy lane. And it doesn't have a snorkel. It must have a snorkel. So
particularly your type of Audi Quattro.
yeah, yeah. I've just load as much as possible. I'm very old. But yeah. So okay. So but because again I wonder if it's the fact that you're a soldier, you're a doctor, and your wife who's smart are both engaged actively in it, both concept and actual practical. You use the word practical a lot, which I think is absolutely the right word. I think it's very encouraging. And I'm kind of, all right, yeah, let me ask your opinion about this.
Go on.
So I play the stock markets every now and then, really badly, so badly. But I've done quite well with, and I am not ashamed about this because I work in the industry. I've done quite well with defense stocks after the invasion of Kiev, not Kiev, as Ukraine. So, and then I think back to COVID. What stocks did the best in COVID? One of them is, I was explaining to the kids yesterday, is pets for home, or what some pet industry come because everyone got locked down, and then so no one would immediately go, well, if we're going to have a pandemic lockdown, what should we invest in? Like medicines and masks and all this sort of stuff. Yeah, you do all right, but if you invested in pet supplies, you'd be absolutely laughing because everyone was like, oh, I'm bored at home and lonely. Let's get a pet. You can't really invest in pets because they're like normally cottage industry sort of thing. But you can invest in the subsidiaries and that go along with it. And so what's going to happen? I've gone off on one now, but what's going to happen in say there's another increasing level of geo conflict happening, other than defense stock? What are we going to need and what's going to like shoot up? Probably to sustain us as a sort of prepping or maybe a slightly reactive, not proactive, but reactive prepping. And you did mention bunkers at the beginning there. Every
I think
self-respecting prepper should have a bunker.
I think the whole it's got to be renewables, hasn't it? Like that's the
Okay.
element that actually from a power, so the onshoring of our power supply and our ability to sustain ourselves. Yeah, I think to sort of linking this all the way back to the start, the sustainability of our food supply is also critical,
Yeah.
and actually how we can how that interacts between the first half of this conversation about things not being overly processed and things not being being manufactured. So food not being overly manufactured and processed, and how then we make something that is sustainable and available in a disaster, which is they're two sides of a problem that are really hard to both to concurrently address, aren't they?
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's very interesting, and it's just fascinating, because the only reason I'm really mates with you, Alex, despite the fact you live in miles away, is you're a doctor. Because I used to,
Yeah,
when I moved down here, I had a mate who was a vet, I had a mate who was a doctor, dentist. I had the full gambit, I live next door to a farmer, so all these things, if you're really, you don't just need equipment. And I love the point about renewable. We need a sort of domestic level, portable, renewable energy unit that you can sort of easily plug into, or have a plug to, you can power your kettle or something that you can just plonk in the middle of the field and then pick it up and put it in the back of your 4x4 if you need to move. But the so I forgot what I was going.
It's amazing how little you actually need, though. Like, so, and when we come down to like the power supply, like it is possible to massively reduce what we like our. That's if you haven't got electric cars. That's the more difficult. If we're all running electric cars and then we start having massive power outages, that makes life a whole world more difficult, because then a large proportion of the country can't mobilise themselves, which is more difficult. But yeah, having a secure power supply on an individual basis is actually easier than you'd think if you are brutal with what you could survive with. Like, actually, there are other ways of creating heat and cooking, so that's that big on. And actually, light doesn't take that much power anymore because everything's really low watt LED type stuff. So yeah, it's actually relatively easy to create a system where you could survive for a pretty long period of time on relative, 3,000 watts is easily doable enough, and that's easily done on a small level generator.
Yeah. I remember I called you yesterday, and we both, a couple of weeks ago, and we'd both been generator shopping, or like window shopping. Yes, mate. Well, I mean, I hope we don't need it, but at the back of my mind, I'm quite excited about. I've always been fascinated by survival horror, without realizing what survival horror was. The notion of having to make decisions and just make do, and in order to survive. It changes it all a lot when you've got kids, I find. Because then you have to worry about them more than yourself, so it becomes more complex and yeah.
Absolutely, and I think it's poignant to consider on Remembrance Day, as we took a pause at the start of this, that this isn't fun. This isn't something that you want to do, and the sort of horrors that are happening at other places in the world right now. It is an absolute disaster. If that comes to our shores, but actually, it's not. There's nothing wrong with having a conversation around how you may prepare yourself if that was to happen. It's just, businesses have business continuity plans. It's just part of that. I don't think it should be anywhere near as outlandish and sort of a sort of odd conversation as what it often is perceived.
Well, that's an interesting point in terms of, I was going to say earlier, almost like the group think. Why is it almost? It's, I've you guys, you and Becky were like, well, we maybe not mention this prepping mindset we've got, and as I said, I mention it to many people, even in the height of a pandemic. And people are like, oh, you're a bit weird and strange, aren't you? Well, yeah, in many ways, but this is not one of them. And why is that kind of like group think, herd think, and the notion that, well, okay, the only way we can the way we want to perceive our environment is it's safe and secure, and to a great extent it is, and it's never been more safe or secure than it is, in this time. We're doing very well as a society, other than all the bits we're not. So it's kind of like it's an aberration for people to actively think, what if something went terminally or just critically wrong? When has that last happened? The Second World War. It's not that long ago. And it's just it's almost like I can't think of the right word, but it's against people's better judgment to actively consider these things. Whereas some of us take a dark pleasure in it, and then others of us just see it as a commonsensical approach. I think.
It's optimism bias, isn't it? That actually we will just think about the good options and not necessarily consider the bad. I particularly enjoyed your last podcast with Prof. The fourth turning.
With Darryl. Good. Yeah. Oh, good. Because anyone who's watching this, have a watch of the one with Professor Daryl Mann in The Fourth Turning, because it talks about global crises and how they might actually be inevitable. So, who's the idiot now, eh? Says all the preppers to everyone out there. Right, okay.
Cool.
Shall we go? I think we've got to go now, haven't we, the pair?
Yeah.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much, Alex. It's brilliant.
No, thank you for having
I'm
me.
sorry I talked so much and interrupted. We'll do some more hopefully, and it'll be great at some point fairly soon, depending on a few things, to do one about the business you started and what you're trying to do, what we're trying to do there, which is basically save lives. The present. I'm not going to go off on one, but at present are being wasted because people are dicks. In a nutshell.
Cool. Thank you very much, Andy.
Okay. All right. Talk to you soon. Cheers, dude.
See you later. Bye.
See you. Bye.
The Wittering Podcast theme tune is produced by Skins. Check out more information about him in the description.